I stumbled upon evidence that my sister-in-law was cheating on my brother with another man while browsing my nephew's tablet. When confronted, she threatened to destroy my life if I ever exposed her secret. I am a 27-year-old woman with an older brother, David, who is 33, and his wife, Suzanne, who is 35. David and Suzanne have been together for 4 years and married last year. Their romance began as a typical workplace love story. Both worked at the same company until David recently accepted a better position elsewhere. My relationship with Suzanne has always been polite but distant. I never warmed up to her as I always sensed something was off. Despite my reservations, I never interfered in their relationship or discouraged David when he decided to marry her. For Thanksgiving, we all gathered at our parents' place, a rare occasion given that we live in different cities. I arrived early, having taken an extra 2 days off work to spend more time with our parents. David and Suzanne arrived later and were warmly welcomed by everyone. When I hugged David, I noticed he wasn't his usual cheerful self. He had dark circles under his eyes and seemed exhausted, barely managing a smile. He greeted us quietly and went upstairs with their luggage. I felt a pang of concern but decided not to say anything in front of everyone. I quietly asked Suzanne if something was bothering him, and she just shrugged, mentioning the long trip. I nodded and then turned to hug my nephew, Daniel, who at 11 seemed to be growing up so quickly. During Thanksgiving dinner, David barely interacted with us. Even when Mom served his favorite pumpkin custard, he didn't seem to notice. By this point, my parents were starting to look concerned as well. After dinner, I was washing the dishes when my nephew Daniel came over to chat. He was excitedly telling me about a new game he loved. We've always bonded over games, so I asked him what it was about. Daniel mentioned that after I finished my chores, he would show me the game on his tablet. I was surprised to learn he had a tablet of his own and asked how he got it. He said Suzanne had given it to him when she upgraded to a new one from work. Daniel went on to tell me how much he enjoyed playing all the different games, and I laughed, happy to see his enthusiasm. After finishing the last of the dishes, I dried my hands and followed Daniel to his room, where he eagerly showed me the game and tried to persuade me to download it on my tablet so we could play together. His cheerful energy was contagious, momentarily easing the tension from David's odd behavior. We played for a while until Suzanne came upstairs, signaling that it was time for him to go to bed. Despite his protests, she took the tablet and told him he could have it back the next day. She tucked him in, and we both left the room. I asked Suzanne if I could borrow his tablet to continue playing and practice, as mine was lagging. She hesitated but then, with a faint smile, handed it over. "Sure, just make sure he gets it back tomorrow morning," she said. With the tablet in hand, I returned to my room determined to master the game before my next session with Daniel. I was engrossed in the game when a text notification popped up on the screen. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced at it. It was from someone named Chad, saying, "Missing you already." I froze, the words sinking in. I couldn't understand why my 11-year-old nephew was receiving such messages from someone named Chad in the middle of the night. My heart raced as I checked the message tab and quickly realized the tablet was connected to Suzanne's iCloud account. It dawned on me that her iPhone must have been synced with this tablet, and she had likely forgotten to log out of her iCloud account before handing it over to Daniel. Confusion and shock washed over me as I tried to make sense of the situation. With trembling hands, I opened the Messages app and clicked on Chad's message. My eyes widened in disbelief as I scrolled through the conversation, revealing a series of intimate exchanges between Suzanne and Chad. I clicked on Chad's contact picture and gasped in shock, realizing he was my brother's neighbor, someone I had seen a few times during visits to David's place. They were supposed to be just neighbors, but their relationship had clearly crossed into dangerous territory. The messages were filled with details of their meetings and plans. Suzanne had poured out her frustrations about her marriage, revealing how she no longer loved David but didn't want to be the one to end things. She mentioned her resentment over David's work taking up all his attention, expressing relief at receiving it from Chad instead. Chad, in turn, shared his delight at being her neighbor, allowing him to visit her whenever he pleased. Their text exchanges were graphic and nauseating, making me feel sick to my stomach. The realization that I had uncovered Suzanne's affair was staggering, a revelation that made my heart race and my mind reel. I was at a loss, unsure of what to do next and wondering if David had any inkling of Suzanne's betrayal. My mind raced as I quickly took photos of all the text messages on my phone. My hand trembled, and I feared Suzanne might knock on my bedroom door at any moment, demanding her tablet back. I didn't want my nephew to accidentally see those messages while playing. Though he was just a kid, he was sharp enough to piece together the truth quickly, just like I had. I couldn't bear the thought of him discovering this at his age. Once I had collected all the evidence, I unsynced the tablet and wiped it clean, knowing Suzanne's phone would still hold all the messages. The entire night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to find sleep. At 3 a.m., I went downstairs for water and found David sitting alone in the living room, watching TV. I pulled out some ice cream from the fridge and asked if he wanted a bowl. He nodded, and I sat down beside him, handing him the bowl of ice cream. The TV's flickering glow cast an eerie light in the room, and an uncomfortable silence settled between us. I told him I was there for him and that he could talk to me about anything troubling him. Eventually, he spoke up, mentioning how stressed he was from work, but I sensed there was more beneath the surface. I hesitated, then decided to take a leap of faith and address the elephant in the room. "Is everything okay between you and Suzanne?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. His eyes flickered with surprise and a hint of vulnerability. After a brief pause, he sighed and admitted that he had been feeling increasingly distant from Suzanne. I listened quietly as he explained that his demanding schedule, working 2 jobs every day, left him with no time for his family. I was stunned to learn that he had taken on an extra job to maintain their lifestyle and keep up with the house mortgage payments. I listened as my brother talked about their marriage, mentioning that they were probably going through a rough patch. I desperately wanted to tell him what I had discovered about Suzanne, but I was unsure how he would react. The weight of the truth was heavy on me, but I didn't want to destroy my brother's marriage without first confronting Suzanne. You have to understand, my brother is 6 years older than me. I was worried he might not believe me despite the evidence, or that Suzanne could manipulate the situation, convincing him I was wrong. I needed to be absolutely certain that Suzanne was cheating on him. The next day, I suggested we go out for a relaxing spa day, and Suzanne eagerly agreed. We enjoyed our time together and then had lunch. During our meal, I decided to cautiously bring up Chad. As soon as I mentioned his name, Suzanne froze mid-bite and looked up at me. I wanted to avoid any games, so I was straightforward with her, letting her know that I had seen all their messages. I told her there was no need for her to deny it, as I had all the proof and just needed her confirmation. To my surprise, Suzanne began yelling, accusing me of invading her personal life by going through her messages. I quickly clarified that I hadn't intruded. Chad's message had simply appeared while I was using my nephew's tablet. I pointed out how inappropriate her messages with Chad were and how she shouldn't have given the tablet to Daniel without checking it first. Suzanne's eyes widened as she asked if I had wiped the tablet clean, and I nodded. She looked relieved, likely thinking I had no proof left, and told me to mind my own business. She then threatened that if I ever told David about this, she would ruin my life. I stared at her blankly, knowing there was nothing she could do to harm me. Her threats were infuriating, and I asked her why she was defending her actions. Suzanne then tried to justify her actions, claiming she deserved a little fun now and then and that Chad made her feel better about herself. The lack of remorse in her voice made me firm in my resolve. I told her she needed to come clean with my brother because I couldn't let this go. She started yelling again, but I cut her off and stood up. I told her to find her way home on her own. I didn't want to be near her after witnessing her bizarre behavior. She continued yelling as I left her there and drove away. When I got home, my mother, who was waiting in the living room, asked if I had a good time with Suzanne. I gave a small nod, trying to keep my expression neutral, and quickly headed to my room. I needed time to think. Suzanne's behavior was completely out of character, or perhaps she had always been this way and had hidden it well until now. My mind raced as I replayed our conversation word for word. Her threats didn't intimidate me, and I knew David and Daniel needed to be protected from her. They deserved to know the truth about her. I decided to give her a few days to speak to my brother on her own. Perhaps she would confess. If she didn't by her birthday in 4 days, I would tell him myself. I kept a close watch, hoping Suzanne would do the right thing and confess to David every time they spent time together. Unfortunately, true to her nature, she never came clean and acted as though our conversation had never happened. Whenever I was alone with my brother, Suzanne would interrupt us, perhaps fearing I would reveal something. I also noticed her receiving frequent text messages throughout the day, and from the way she smiled, I could tell they were from Chad, meaning she was still in contact with him despite my warning. Knowing how much David loved and worked hard to provide for the family, seeing her continue to cheat on him, even after I had asked her to stop and confess, felt like a knife to my heart. With her birthday the next day, I knew I had to expose her. David and Suzanne were scheduled to fly out in the evening after her birthday celebration, so if there was ever a good time to talk to my brother, it had to be before they returned home. On her birthday, Suzanne was unusually cheerful, as if she believed she had successfully intimidated me into silence. Little did she know, I had something planned for her that day. My mother had lovingly prepared a grand meal for the celebration, and we had invited some close family and friends to join us. Suzanne relished being the center of attention and seemed to be enjoying herself throughout the day. When it was time to open presents, she eagerly sat down with everyone to check them out. I watched her with a smirk as she went through each gift, soaking up all the attention. When she reached my gift, her curiosity was palpable. It was a sizable package, and with excitement, she unwrapped it to find a photo album inside. The album began with a photo of her from her college days. At the top, she smiled and asked if I had compiled her childhood pictures into the album. Her eyes sparkled with the anticipation of a sentimental family memory collection. I smiled politely, knowing her expression would soon change from excitement to shock. She might have thought she could act all cute and innocent in front of everyone, but she was in for a surprise. The instant Suzanne flipped open the album, her face was met with an A4-sized photo of her and Chad. As she continued to flip through the pages, she saw multiple screenshots of her messages with Chad. My mother and brother, sitting on either side of her, leaned in to read the contents. My mother gasped, instantly realizing what she was seeing, while my brother looked bewildered. Suzanne tried to snatch the album back, but David was quicker. He grabbed it from her hands and began flipping through the pages. At this point, everyone sensed something was terribly wrong and exchanged uneasy glances. My dad, picking up on the tension, loudly asked if there was a problem. We watched as Suzanne's face drained of color, her realization dawning that she couldn't escape the truth any longer. Her eyes, filled with anger, locked onto mine, but I held her gaze, making it clear I wasn't going to back down. I had carefully planned this moment, even if it seemed drastic. She had chosen unfaithfulness, and it was time for her to face the consequences. After flipping through the pages, my brother looked directly at me and asked if it was all true. I nodded in affirmation. Suzanne started to stammer out excuses, but the damage was done. My brother seemed as though he had been hit with a brick of reality. Without saying a word, I had dropped the truth bomb, leaving the room in stunned silence. David then took Suzanne's phone from her, likely to investigate further. My parents, now going through the album, looked visibly stressed. My mother asked how I had discovered all of this, and that's when I told them the whole story. I explained that I had accidentally come across the messages while using my nephew's tablet, which Suzanne had forgotten to log out of. I showed them the screenshots I had taken. I continued, telling them that I had confronted Suzanne the next day, urging her to come clean to David, but she had refused and threatened me instead. That's why I had no choice but to reveal her affair in this manner. After discovering the proof of Suzanne's chats with Chad on her phone and hearing my side of the story, my brother stormed out, likely needing time to process everything. My dad, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, finally spoke up and told Suzanne to leave our house. Caught in her web of lies, Suzanne tried to offer weak excuses, but no one was willing to listen. My dad firmly told her that what she had done was unforgivable and that she should have come clean to David instead of forcing me to expose her. It was a satisfying sight to see Suzanne exposed, her face red with embarrassment. She began to cry and hurried upstairs, mortified. Since the incident, my brother has not returned home with Suzanne. My nephew is staying with us, and David has asked Suzanne to give him space, despite her pleas to return with him. My parents have talked to me more about the situation and fully understand why I had to expose her this way. After the incident, I discussed the matter with my grandmother, who expressed disapproval. She believed I should not have disrupted my brother's marriage by revealing Suzanne's secret. Given my deep respect and love for my grandmother, her perspective has left me questioning if what I did was right. Am I the bad guy for exposing Suzanne's affair when she didn't reveal anything to my brother? Update 1. Thank you all for your honest opinions. While some of you think that I was indeed in the wrong, I appreciate those who support my actions. I want to clarify again that I wouldn't have taken this step if Suzanne had chosen to talk to my brother herself. I had confronted her beforehand, asking her to come clean. I truly wish she had been honest and told him about her affair instead of trying to threaten me. Afterwards, my brother and I sat down to discuss everything in more detail. It was heartbreaking to see him break down, realizing he had no idea that Suzanne had been betraying him all this time. He kept questioning if his 2 jobs had led to this, wondering if he hadn't given her enough attention. My heart ached for him, knowing how hard he had worked to provide for his family. I assured him that Suzanne's actions had nothing to do with him. He had always been an exemplary husband and father, and if Suzanne couldn't appreciate that, then she didn't deserve to be with him. Despite my efforts to console him, my brother remains deeply affected by the situation, frequently going through the photo album with all of Suzanne's messages to Chad. I'm unsure when he will talk to Suzanne about it. I've decided to take a few more days off from work and consider helping out at my parents' place to support my brother and take care of my nephew during this challenging time. Update 2. Over the last few days, Suzanne's messages have turned increasingly threatening and erratic. She continues to blame me for revealing her secret to my brother and the rest of the family, showing no remorse for her actions. At first, I tried to brush it off, understanding her anger, but her messages have become more graphic and threatening, even suggesting she might physically harm me. Her vile threats escalated to the point where I felt I had no choice but to show them to my parents today. My mom and dad were immediately upset and furious upon reading her messages. They urged me to show these threats to my brother. I hesitated, knowing he was already dealing with so much and feeling down about the whole situation. However, when he saw what Suzanne had been sending me, he immediately switched into protective older brother mode. He assured me that he would handle the situation and told me to block her right away. He promised that she wouldn't bother me again and made it clear that he would take care of her behavior from now on. It's been a priority for me to spend extra time with my nephew lately. With my brother and him set to fly back home in a couple of days, I want to make the most of our time together. Although my nephew senses that something is off because Suzanne isn't around, his youth allows him to get easily absorbed in his games and toys. For the sake of my adorable nephew, I hope everything turns out okay. Following my brother's advice, I have blocked Suzanne, so hopefully she won't be able to reach out to me anymore with her threats. I am focused on creating a more positive and comforting environment for my nephew during these uncertain times. Update 3 It's been 4 months since my last update. I know it's been quite some time since I last shared an update, but a lot has happened since then, and I wanted to take time to process everything. After my brother and nephew flew back home, he confronted Suzanne about the situation. Despite the clear evidence we had, she continued to deny everything. Frustrated and determined to get the truth, my brother decided to have a direct conversation with Chad. During this conversation, Chad confessed to everything. He revealed that Suzanne had expressed her love for him, and he reciprocated those feelings. According to Chad, he saw no reason to continue hiding their affair. To my brother's shock, Chad revealed that he and Suzanne had been romantically involved for over a year. This revelation triggered a fierce and emotional confrontation between David and Suzanne. When David shared the details of his conversation with Chad, our hearts broke for him. My dad urged David to make a decisive choice about their marriage, and my mom echoed this sentiment, assuring him that we would support whatever decision he made. I reminded him to prioritize our nephew's well-being, emphasizing that it was unhealthy for a child to be exposed to such toxicity. 2 months later, David made the difficult decision to file for separation from Suzanne. The constant conflicts had eroded their relationship, and he came to realize there was nothing left to salvage. Unable to forgive Suzanne for her betrayal and with her unwillingness to acknowledge her faults, it became clear that parting ways was the best solution. As the legal process continues, Suzanne has been required to move out of David's home. Her actions had severe repercussions, and she now faced the reality of losing her marriage. Despite these challenges, my family has remained a strong support system for David and my nephew. The emotional toll on David is evident, but he continues to show strength and resilience, determined to create a stable environment for his child. Reflecting on the entire experience, I firmly believe that exposing Suzanne's affair was crucial for my brother's well-being and the protection of my nephew. The truth brought clarity and enabled David to see the deception he had been living under. I stand by my decision and will continue to support my brother in his journey to heal and rebuild his life.